In 1974, a soldier walked out of the jungle. He was still carrying his rifle, still ready to fight. He had no idea World War II ended 29 years ago. His name was Haru Onoda, and this is his unbelievable true story. In the year 1974, nearly 30 years after World War II had ended, a Japanese soldier walked out of the jungle. He was still wearing his uniform, still carrying his rifle, still ready to fight. He had no idea the war was over. For nearly 3 decades, he had been living in complete isolation, hiding, surviving, waiting. His name was Haru Onoda, and this is his unbelievable true story. World War II was reaching its most brutal phase. Japan was losing. The United States was advancing across the Pacific. Island by island, battle by battle, Japan's empire was collapsing. But Japanese soldiers were taught one thing above all else: never surrender, never quit, and never stop fighting, even if it meant dying alone. Haru Onoda was only 22 years old. He was not a famous general, not a war hero, just a young man, trained to follow orders. But unlike most soldiers, Onoda was trained in something different. He was trained in guerrilla warfare, espionage, sabotage, survival behind enemy lines. He was taught how to live in the jungle, how to hide, how to disappear, and most importantly, how to continue fighting, no matter what happened. In December 1944, Onoda received his mission. He was sent to a small island in the Philippines, Lubang Island. His orders were clear: disrupt enemy operations, destroy supplies, gather intelligence, and never surrender, no matter what. His commanding officer told him something he would never forget. Even if it takes 3 years, even if it takes 5 years, we will come back for you. Onoda believed him with all his heart. When Onoda arrived on Lubang Island, he wasn't alone. There were 3 other Japanese soldiers. Together, they prepared to defend the island. But everything changed quickly. In early 1945, American forces invaded Lubang Island. The Japanese military was overwhelmed, outnumbered, outgunned, defeated. Most Japanese soldiers were killed. Others surrendered. But Onoda did something different. He ran into the jungle. The jungle became his new home. Hot, humid, dangerous. Every sound could mean death. Every shadow could hide an enemy. But Onoda remembered his orders. Never surrender, never stop fighting, even if he was alone. The 4 soldiers hid deep in the jungle. They watched American forces take control of the island. They waited. They believed reinforcements would come. They believed Japan would return. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. And then something strange happened. Leaflets began falling from the sky. Pieces of paper, drifting down into the jungle. The soldiers picked them up. And read the words: Japan has surrendered. The war is over. You can come out safely. But Onoda didn't believe it. He thought it was a trick. Enemy propaganda, designed to fool them. He remembered his orders: never surrender, never stop fighting. And so, he stayed, hidden in the jungle, waiting, still believing the war was not over. He thought he would be rescued soon. He had no idea he would remain in that jungle for the next 29 years. The war was over. Japan had surrendered. The world was beginning to heal. But deep inside the jungle of Lubang Island, Haru Onoda was still fighting a war that no longer existed. He wasn't alone, at least, not yet. 3 other Japanese soldiers remained with him: Private Yuichi Akatsu, Corporal Shoichi Shimada, Private First Class Kinshichi Kazuka. 4 men, 4 rifles, 4 shadows, hiding in a jungle controlled by the enemy. They were hungry, confused, but determined. They believed rescue would come any day now. The jungle was their prison and their protection. They moved only at night. They avoided open areas. They trusted nothing, not even silence, because silence could mean danger. Every distant sound, every broken branch, every bird taking flight, could mean enemy soldiers were nearby. Their hearts never stopped racing. Their fingers never left their rifles. They were always ready to fight, always ready to die. Food quickly became the greatest enemy. They had no supply lines, no reinforcements, no support. They had to survive on whatever the jungle gave them. Bananas, coconuts, wild plants, sometimes stolen rice from nearby farms. At night, they would sneak into villages, move like ghosts, take what they needed, and disappear before anyone could see them. To the villagers, they weren't men, they were spirits, phantoms in the darkness. Then, the leaflets came again. More papers falling from the sky. More messages. More promises. Japan has surrendered. The war is over. Come out safely. This time, the leaflets included photos. Photos of their families. Photos of Japan. Messages written personally to them. But Onoda refused to believe it. He examined every detail, every word, every image, looking for signs of deception. To him, it was obvious. This was enemy propaganda, a trap. He told the others, "This is fake. The Americans are trying to trick us. We must continue fighting." And they listened, because Onoda was their leader, because they trusted him, because they had nothing else to believe in. Months turned into years. The world moved on. Cities were rebuilt. Families reunited. Nations recovered. But in the jungle, time stood still. The soldiers developed routines. They built hidden shelters, carefully camouflaged, invisible to anyone passing by. They cleaned their weapons daily, maintained their equipment, prepared for battles that never came. Every day, they waited for Japan to return. Every day, they believed rescue was coming. Tomorrow, or the next day, or the day after that. But rescue never came. Doubt slowly began to grow. Not in Onoda, but in one of the others. Private Yuichi Akatsu. He was younger, more afraid, more uncertain. He began to question everything. What if the war really was over? What if Japan had surrendered? What if they were abandoned? These thoughts were dangerous, because doubt could destroy them. Doubt could break their mission. Doubt could break their minds. Onoda noticed the change. He saw the fear in Akatsu's eyes. But he remained firm. The war is not over. We must continue fighting. He believed it completely, because accepting the truth would mean accepting that everything they had suffered, everything they had endured, had been for nothing. The jungle showed no mercy. Rain fell endlessly, soaking their clothes, rotting their equipment, destroying their shelters. Insects bit their skin. Diseases weakened their bodies. Infections spread. Every day was a battle for survival, not against enemy soldiers, but against nature itself. Still, they endured, because surrender was not an option. It never was. One night, Akatsu made a decision that would change everything. He could not take it anymore. The fear, the hunger, the endless waiting. He began to believe the war was truly over. He began to believe they had been forgotten. And so, he left, alone, without telling the others. He walked out of the jungle, into the unknown, into a world that had moved on without him. When Onoda woke up, Akatsu was gone, vanished. No trace, no goodbye, nothing. Onoda felt only one thing: betrayal. To him, Akatsu had not escaped. He had surrendered. He had failed his duty. He had become the enemy. From that moment forward, only 3 soldiers remained. 3 men against the world. Still fighting, still hiding, still believing. They had no idea they would remain there for decades. 1 soldier had escaped. 3 remained. And the jungle was beginning to change them. Forever. The jungle was no longer just a hiding place. It had become their entire world. A world with no escape. No rescue. No certainty. Only survival. Every single day was a fight to stay alive. Not against enemy soldiers, but against hunger, against sickness, against loneliness, against their own minds. By now, it had been years since the war ended. But Onoda and the remaining 2 soldiers, Shoichi Shimada and Kinshichi Kazuka, still believed the war was ongoing. They had created a routine. Wake up before sunrise, check their surroundings, search for food, stay hidden, stay alive. Their bodies had become thin. Their uniforms were torn. Their boots were falling apart. But their rifles were always clean, always ready, because in their minds, the enemy could attack at any moment. Food was becoming harder to find. The jungle could not always provide enough, so they took greater risks. At night, they would leave the safety of the trees and move toward nearby villages. Silent, careful, invisible, they stole rice, bananas, sometimes even cows. They moved quickly, because being seen meant danger. To the villagers, these men were not soldiers. They were criminals, ghosts, enemies hiding in the shadows. Over time, the villagers became afraid. They knew someone was out there, watching, waiting, stealing, sometimes attacking. Reports spread across the island. Japanese soldiers were still hiding in the jungle. The war might be over, but danger remained. Search parties were organized. Police entered the jungle, looking for them, calling out to them, trying to bring them home. But Onoda and his men did not trust them. They believed it was another trick, another lie. They stayed hidden, and prepared to fight. The years passed silently. The world changed. Technology advanced. New wars began. New generations were born. But Onoda remained frozen in time. Still a soldier of World War II. Still following orders. Still waiting for Japan to return. His mission had become his identity. Without it, he was nothing. Without it, his suffering would have no meaning. So he refused to let it go. Isolation began to change them. Not just physically, but mentally. They trusted no one. They questioned everything. Every sound was suspicious. Every movement was dangerous. Their world became smaller. Their thoughts became darker. They lived in constant tension, constant fear, constant readiness. They could never relax, never feel safe, because in their minds, the war was still happening. One day, everything changed. While moving near a village, they were spotted. Gunshots rang out. Bullets flew through the air. The soldiers ran, heart pounding, adrenaline surging. But Shimada was hit. A bullet tore through his leg. He fell to the ground, in pain, bleeding. Onoda and Kazuka dragged him back into the jungle. They treated his wound as best they could. But they had no medicine, no doctors, no help, only time, only hope. Shimada survived, but he was never the same. He became slower, weaker, more vulnerable, and in the jungle, weakness could mean death. Onoda watched everything carefully. He saw his men changing. He saw their strength fading. He saw time taking its toll. But his belief never wavered. He was still a soldier, still following orders, still waiting, because he remembered his commander's words. No matter what happens, we will come back for you. Onoda believed those words with absolute certainty. They were the only thing keeping him alive, the only thing giving him purpose, the only thing preventing him from surrendering. Sometimes, at night, when everything was silent, Onoda would think about home, about his family, about Japan. He wondered what had happened to them. He wondered if they were safe. He wondered if they were waiting for him. But he never allowed himself to believe the war was over. Because hope could be dangerous. Hope could weaken his resolve. Hope could make him surrender. And surrender was unthinkable. By now, they had survived nearly 10 years in the jungle. 10 years of isolation. 10 years of fear. 10 years of waiting. But the jungle was not finished with them yet. Soon, it would take another soldier. And Onoda would become even more alone.
By the mid-1950s, the jungle had already taken so much from them. Their comfort, their youth, their connection to the world. But soon, it would take something even more valuable. One of their own. Now, only 3 soldiers remained. Hiru Onoda, Shoichi Shimada, Kinshichi Kazuka. They had survived together for nearly a decade. They had shared hunger, shared fear, shared suffering. They had become more than soldiers. They had become brothers, bound together by war, bound together by survival, bound together by belief. But the jungle was slowly breaking them. Corporal Shimada had never fully recovered from his gunshot wound. His body was weaker, his movements slower, his endurance fading. But he never complained. He never gave up, because surrender was not an option. Not for a Japanese soldier. Not for Shimada. Not for Onoda. Not for any of them. One afternoon in 1954, everything changed. The soldiers were moving near a beach. Carefully, quietly, watching for danger. But this time, Danger found them first. Local police had been searching the area. They had been hunting the mysterious soldiers for years. And now, they saw them. Gunfire erupted instantly. Bullets tore through the air. The jungle exploded with sound. Onoda and Kazuka ran for cover. But Shimada was exposed. A single bullet struck him directly in the chest. He fell instantly. No time to react. No time to escape. No time to say goodbye. Onoda watched helplessly. He couldn't reach him. He couldn't save him. He couldn't do anything. The police continued firing, closing in. Onoda and Kazuka were forced to retreat. Forced to leave Shimada behind. Forced to abandon their brother. It was the only way to survive. But the cost was unbearable. That night, the jungle felt colder than ever before. Quieter. Emptier. One of them was gone. Forever. Onoda said nothing. He showed no emotion. But inside, something had changed. He had lost another part of himself. Another part of his world. Another reason to keep going. But still, he did not surrender. Still, he did not give up. Because surrender would mean Shimada had died for nothing. Because surrender would mean their mission had failed. Because surrender would mean accepting the truth. A truth Onoda refused to face. Now, only 2 soldiers remained. Onoda and Kazuka. 2 men, alone in the jungle, against the entire world. They trusted no one. They believed nothing. They depended only on each other. Their bond became even stronger. Because they had no one else. Because they had nothing else. Because they were all that remained of a forgotten war. Years continued to pass. The world moved forward, but Onoda and Kazuka remained trapped in the past. Still fighting. Still hiding. Still waiting. They had no calendars. No clocks. No connection to reality. Only instinct. Only routine. Only belief. They had become ghosts. Invisible to the world. Forgotten by history. Sometimes, Onoda wondered if they were the last soldiers alive. The last defenders of an empire that no longer existed. But he pushed those thoughts away. Because doubt was dangerous. Doubt could destroy him. Doubt could break his mission. And his mission was everything. Without it, his suffering would have no purpose. Without it, his survival would have no meaning. Now, only 2 soldiers remained. 2 men lost in time. 2 men abandoned by history. But soon, one of them would die. And Hiro Onoda would face the jungle alone. Completely alone. For the next 20 years. By the early 1970s, nearly 25 years had passed since World War II ended. The world had changed beyond recognition. New nations had risen. New wars had begun. Technology had transformed human life. But deep inside the jungle of Lubang Island, Hiro Onoda was still fighting. Still hiding. Still waiting. He was no longer part of the modern world. He belonged to a war that had ended decades ago. And now, he had only one companion left. Kinshichi Kazuka. Time had aged them. Their faces were harder. Their bodies weaker. Their uniforms torn beyond repair. But their mission remained unchanged. They still believed Japan would return. They still believed rescue would come. Because without that belief, there was nothing left. Even after all these years, they continued their mission, sabotaging farms, destroying crops, avoiding capture. To them, they were still soldiers behind enemy lines. Still fighting for their country. Still obeying orders. But to everyone else, they were criminals. Dangerous relics of a forgotten war. Police continued searching for them. Year after year. But the jungle protected Onoda. The jungle had become part of him. He knew every path, every tree, every shadow. He had mastered survival. He had become invisible. Then, in October 1972, everything changed. Onoda and Kazuka were near a rice field. Continuing their mission. Continuing their war. But this time, they were seen. Police quickly surrounded the area. Gunshots exploded through the air. Chaos. Fear. Violence. Onoda and Kazuka ran, trying to escape, trying to survive. But Kazuka was hit. A bullet tore into his body. He fell instantly. Onoda turned, but it was too late. Kazuka was dead. His last companion. His last brother. Gone forever. For the first time in nearly 30 years, Hiro Onoda was completely alone. No allies. No companions. No one left who understood him. No one left who shared his mission. No one left who shared his reality. Only silence. Only jungle. Only himself. Most men would have surrendered. Most men would have given up. Most men would have accepted reality. But Onoda was different. He had spent half his life believing one thing. The war was not over. His mission was not finished. His orders were still active. He could not abandon them. Because his identity depended on them. Without his mission, he didn't know who he was. Without his mission, he had no purpose. So he continued. Alone. He survived alone. No help. No support. No human contact. Only instinct. only discipline, only belief. He became something more than human. Something shaped entirely by survival, entirely by war, entirely by isolation. He had become the last soldier of World War II. At night, he sat alone, listening to the jungle, listening to the silence, listening to a world that had forgotten him. He had no idea that the world was searching for him, that people knew his name, that his story had become legend. He thought he was abandoned, forgotten, left behind forever. But everything was about to change, because somewhere, a young man was looking for him, not as an enemy, not as a soldier, but as a friend, and soon, their meeting would end a war that had lasted 29 years. For nearly 3 decades, Hiroo Onoda had never surrendered, but now, his final test was coming. By 1974, Japan was no longer the broken nation it once had been. It had rebuilt itself, stronger, modern, alive, but one ghost from its past still remained lost in the jungle. Hiroo Onoda. For years, people had searched for him. Soldiers, police, explorers, even his own family, but no one had ever found him. Many believed he was already dead, but one man believed otherwise. His name was Norio Suzuki, and he was about to do something no one else had ever done. Norio Suzuki was young, only 24 years old, an adventurer, a dreamer. He was not a soldier. He was not a professional searcher. He was just an ordinary man with an extraordinary goal. He told his friends something unusual. He said he wanted to find 3 things: the Lieutenant Onoda, a panda, and the abominable snowman. In that order. Most people laughed. They thought he was crazy. But Suzuki was serious. He believed Onoda was still alive, and he was determined to find him. In February 1974, Suzuki traveled to Lubang Island. He entered the jungle alone. No weapons, no protection, no guarantee he would survive. Because he knew one thing. If Onoda was still alive, he would still believe the war was ongoing. And he would still be dangerous. One wrong move, and Suzuki could be killed instantly. But Suzuki was not afraid. He walked deeper into the jungle, calling out his name. Onoda, I am Suzuki. I am not your enemy. The jungle answered only with silence. But Suzuki was not alone. Hidden in the shadows, Onoda was watching him. For years, Onoda had observed every human from a distance. Carefully, suspiciously, ready to fight, ready to kill. But this man was different. He was alone, unarmed, and calm. Onoda watched him for days, studying his behavior, looking for signs of deception, looking for signs of danger. But Suzuki showed none. He simply waited, patiently, respectfully. Then, one day, it happened. Onoda stepped out of the jungle. For the first time in years, he revealed himself, still wearing his uniform, still carrying his rifle, still ready to fight. Suzuki saw him, and froze. He was face to face with a ghost. A soldier lost in time. A man who had not surrendered for 29 years. Neither of them spoke at first. The moment was surreal, unreal, like 2 men from different worlds meeting for the first time. Suzuki spoke gently. He told Onoda the truth. The war is over. Japan has surrendered. You can come home now. But Onoda did not believe him. He had heard these lies before. He had seen fake leaflets, fake messages, fake promises. He trusted nothing, no one, except one person, his commanding officer. Onoda told Suzuki something important. He said, I will not surrender unless my commanding officer orders me to do so. He had waited 29 years. He would wait longer if he had to. Because his orders were everything. Suzuki understood. This was not just a soldier. This was a man trapped by loyalty, trapped by honor, trapped by belief. Suzuki made a promise. He said he would return. He said he would find Onoda's commanding officer. He said he would bring him here, so Onoda could finally be free. Before leaving, Suzuki did something powerful. He bowed to Onoda. He showed him respect, not as an enemy, but as a soldier, as a man, as a human being. Onoda bowed back. For the first time in decades, he felt seen. He felt understood. He felt remembered. After 29 years, someone had finally found him. But his war was not over yet, because only one man could end it. His commander. And soon, that man would arrive. After meeting Hiroo Onoda, Norio Suzuki knew one thing for certain. Onoda was still a soldier. Still loyal. Still waiting for orders. And only one man in the world could give those orders. His former commanding officer, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi. Suzuki returned to Japan immediately. Determined to find him. Determined to end a war that had lasted nearly 30 years. But Major Taniguchi was no longer a military commander. He was no longer a soldier. He was now an old man, working a simple civilian job, living a quiet life, like the war had never happened. Like the past had stayed in the past. But Suzuki found him, and told him everything. He told him Onoda was alive, still fighting, still waiting for his orders. Taniguchi was shocked. He could hardly believe it. A soldier, still loyal after 29 years. Still obeying his command, still trapped in a war that no longer existed. He knew what he had to do. He agreed to return, one final time, as a commander. In March 1974, Major Taniguchi traveled to Lubang Island, accompanied by Suzuki, and others who had come to witness history. They entered the jungle, the same jungle that had imprisoned Onoda for decades. The same jungle that had shaped his entire existence. Suzuki called out his name, and once again, Onoda appeared, stepping out of the shadows. Still in uniform, still carrying his rifle, still ready to fight. Onoda saw him, his commander, the man whose orders had defined his entire life, the man he had waited for nearly 3 decades. Taniguchi looked at Onoda, and saw not just a soldier, but a man who had sacrificed everything. His youth, his future, his life, for duty, for loyalty, for honor. Taniguchi began to speak, his voice calm, but emotional. He read the official order. Lieutenant Onoda, you are hereby relieved from your military duty. The war has ended. You must surrender immediately. For a moment, there was only silence. Onoda stood frozen. These were the words he had waited his entire life to hear. The words that would finally end his mission. The words that would finally set him free. But freedom came with a price. Because surrender meant accepting the truth. Accepting that the war had ended decades ago. Accepting that his suffering had been unnecessary. Accepting that his entire adult life had been spent in isolation. For a war that was already over. His hands trembled. His mind struggled to accept reality. But he was still a soldier. And a soldier obeys orders. Slowly, carefully, Onoda removed his rifle. The same rifle he had carried for 29 years. The same rifle he had cleaned every single day. The same rifle that had defined his identity. He placed it on the ground. He removed his ammunition, his weapon, his last connection to the war. And for the first time since 1945, Hiro Onoda surrendered. He stood there, silent, still, free. His war was finally over. After 29 years, 29 years of survival, 29 years of isolation, 29 years of loyalty, 29 years of waiting. He was no longer a soldier. He was finally, just a man. March 9, 1974. The last soldier of World War II had finally surrendered, but his journey was not over yet, because the world he was returning to was no longer the world he had left behind.
After 29 years in the jungle, Hiro Onoda was finally going home. Not as a soldier, not as a ghost, but as a man returning from a war long forgotten. He stepped onto the airplane, still wearing his old uniform, still carrying the silence of 3 decades. As the plane lifted into the sky, Onoda left behind the only world he had known for half his life. The jungle, his battlefield, his prison, his home. When Onoda arrived in Japan, thousands of people were waiting. Crowds filled the airport. Journalists, cameras, strangers, all watching him, all welcoming him home. To them, he was a hero, a symbol of loyalty, a symbol of honor, a living piece of history. But to Onoda, everything felt unfamiliar, strange, overwhelming. The Japan he returned to was not the Japan he remembered. The cities were bigger, the buildings taller, the streets louder, cars moved faster, lights filled the night. Technology was everywhere. Televisions, radios, machines he had never seen before. It felt like he had traveled into the future. Because in many ways, he had left in 1944, and returned to a completely different world. Then came the moment he had not experienced in nearly 30 years. He saw his family. They were older, changed, but still there, still waiting, still loving him. His mother had believed he was dead. His family had mourned him. And now, he stood before them, alive, real, returned from the dead. It was a moment beyond words. A moment beyond explanation. Because how do you explain losing 29 years of your life? How do you explain surviving alone for decades? How do you explain becoming a stranger in your own world? But returning home was not easy. Because Onoda no longer belonged to this world. He had spent half his life surviving in isolation, following orders, living by discipline, living by war. Modern life felt meaningless, confusing, empty. In the jungle, every decision mattered, every action had purpose, every moment was survival. But here, there was no mission, no enemy, no purpose, only peace. And peace was harder to understand than war. Many people admired him, they respected his loyalty, his discipline, his sacrifice. But others questioned him, because during his time in the jungle, Onoda had attacked villages. He had caused deaths. He had caused suffering. Not everyone saw him as a hero. Some saw him as a man trapped by blind obedience. A man who could not accept reality. A man shaped completely by war. Onoda himself struggled with this truth. He had done what he believed was right. He had followed orders. He had remained loyal. But the world had changed. And now, he had to learn how to live in it again. At night, he sat quietly, thinking about everything he had lost. His youth, his friends, his normal life, all gone, consumed by war, consumed by loyalty, consumed by time. He was free, but freedom felt unfamiliar, because freedom meant starting over. After 29 years, Haru Onoda had survived the impossible. He had outlasted war, outlasted time, outlasted history itself. But his greatest challenge was not surviving the jungle. It was learning how to live again.
After returning to Japan, Haru Onoda faced a reality he had never prepared for. Peace. For most people, peace was normal. But for Onoda, peace was unfamiliar. For nearly 30 years, his entire existence had been defined by war, by survival, by mission. Without it, he felt lost, disconnected, like a man without a purpose. Modern life moved too fast. Technology felt overwhelming. People felt different. Everything had changed. But he had not. Inside, he was still the same soldier who had entered the jungle in 1944. Still loyal, still disciplined, still shaped by survival. He struggled to find meaning in this new world. A world that no longer needed soldiers like him. Eventually, Onoda made a surprising decision. He left Japan and moved to Brazil. There, he lived a simpler life. Far from the noise, far from the crowds, far from the memories. He became a farmer, working with nature, living quietly, living peacefully. For the first time in his life, he was truly free.
Years later, Onoda returned to Japan again. But this time, he returned with a new purpose. He wanted to help young people. He wanted to teach them survival skills, discipline, strength, mental resilience, not for war, but for life. He opened a survival school, teaching others what he had learned, not about fighting enemies, but about surviving challenges, about staying strong, about enduring hardship, because he knew something most people never would. He knew what it meant to survive alone. For decades, as he grew older, Onoda began to reflect on his life. The war, the jungle, the waiting, the suffering, the loss. He never saw himself as a hero. He saw himself as a soldier, a man who had followed orders, a man who had done his duty. Nothing more, nothing less. On January 16, 2014, Haru Onoda died. He was 91 years old. He had lived a long life. A life unlike any other. A life shaped by war, shaped by isolation, shaped by loyalty. His story became legend, not because he fought battles, but because he endured, because he survived, because he never gave up. Somewhere in the jungles of Lubang Island, the trees still stand, the wind still moves through the leaves. The jungle still remembers the soldier who never surrendered, the soldier who waited, the soldier who survived, the soldier who became a ghost, and then became human again. For 29 years, Haru Onoda believed the war was not over. But perhaps, his real war was not against enemies. It was against loneliness, against time, against reality itself. And in the end, he survived them all.